Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Mrs. G's Story Time. It has been, I think, 3 or 4 weeks. It has been a long time, and I do ask your forgiveness. We have been in the process of moving from a house that we were in for 13 years to a smaller house in Cincinnati, closer to our grandchildren. So it has been an upheaval of moving, and it's been crazy. And in that meantime, I've had kids camp, and I've had family camp, and different situations coming up. So again, please forgive me, and we want to get back on track and finish up the book for Betsy Ten Boom so we can go on to another book that I'm excited about. But I'm not going to tell you what it is yet. But we are reading Betsy Ten Boom, Promise of God by Mike Evans, with permission by Time Worthy Book. And as I said, we are on chapter 41. Later that month, the door to our cell opened. 2 guards led me out to the corridor. Flanking on either side, they escorted me to the corner where they'd turned to go to the showers. Only this time, we turned the opposite direction. Down the corridor, I saw a door with a window in it. Sunlight streamed in through the window, and I stared at it, drinking in the wonder and the beauty of the bright natural light. I hadn't seen the sun in months, and expected I would not for a long time to come. So I made the most of it, knowing that at any moment we would turn to one side or the other into yet another long, dark hallway. Instead, we continued straight toward the door. As we reached it, one of the guards pushed it open, and to my amazement, we stepped outside to a courtyard in the center of the prison. In the middle of the yard were 3 cottages, standing side by side. The 2 on either side were faded and drab, but the one in the middle had been freshly covered with paint. Well-kept flower beds lay along the foundation, and in them were robust, thriving tulips. It was early spring, and the mornings were still cool, but already the flowers were on the verge of blooming, and hope welled within me as the guards led me towards it. I was certain God was sending me a message, but I had no idea what he might be saying. When we reached the cottage, one of the guards rapped on the door with her knuckles, then pushed it open without waiting and led me inside. A desk stood to the right of the door, and seated behind it was Rudolf Skakel, the magistrate I'd seen when I first arrived at The Hague. At the opposite end of the room was a fireplace with a low fire burning. Lamps on either side of the desk cast a warm yellow glow that, with the fire in the fireplace, made the room seem cozy. Skakel stood it as we entered and gestured to the chair across the desk. "Have a seat," he said, then dismissed the guards with a nod and returned to his seat. By then I was tired from the walk and breathing heavily, so I collapsed in the chair he offered and waited while the guards left the room. His gesture of standing when I entered told me he was more than polite and suggested he thought of me as something more than a prisoner, which was more decency than anyone had shown me since my arrival. When we were alone and the door was closed, I felt the freedom to make a comment. So I said, "You have beautiful tulips outside." A smile came to Skakel's face, and for the next few moments he told me about his father, who was a gardener, and about the flowers they grew on their small farm when he was a boy. I remembered my great-grandfather growing vegetables and fruits in the winter, and recounted the story for him. He seemed kind, considerate, and actually listened while I spoke. As we continued to talk, Skakel turned to the table behind him, where a pitcher of water stood with several glasses. He took a glass and filled it with water. I watched as the water splashed against the bottom, swirled around with a gurgling noise, and slowly rose toward the top. My lips were dry and parched, and I wondered how anyone could be so blind as not to see what a cruel gesture it was, drinking water in front of prisoners, especially the way the prisoners were being treated. And Skakel reached across the desk and set the glass in front of me. "I'm sure you're thirsty," he said, gesturing towards the glass. "Please, drink up." As if in a dream, I picked up the glass and drank it in one long gulp. He chuckled as he refilled it, then reached back to the table where their pitchers sat and brought out a plate of bread with small pat of butter. He sat it before me, too, and said, "I thought you might be hungry." Then he refilled the empty glass a third time. While I ate the bread and drank the water, Skakel opened a file, and his face became serious and brooding. They know that you and your sister developed a network of operatives who gave assistance to the Jews. His eyes were focused on the papers before him, and he spoke as if summarizing what he saw on the pages. The soldiers who were assigned to kill the babies at the orphanage have been executed. He glanced up to see my reaction, which I did my best to suppress. Then he kept talking. But they have reason to believe your sister, not you, was actually in charge. And they have information from your physician about your medical condition, which is an extenuating circumstance. He looked me in the eye. If you give a statement outlining how the network operated, naming names, implicating your sister, they will agree to let you go home. So this is the way it works. Give me bread and water, treat me like a decent human being, and then suggest I can go free if I betray my sister. I leaned back in the chair and rested my hands in my lap, thinking of what to say next. Part of me wanted to lash out. The other part thought better of it. But as I sat there, I became convinced that Skakel was merely offering me what the Germans told him to suggest. If he knew me and my family as well as he seemed to, and if he knew I would never agree to such a deal, so I decided to take the conversation in a different direction. Do you know who my sister is? Yes, he nodded. How is she? Doing well for being here. Skakel looked around again at the file. Your nephew was released from prison, as was your brother William. They sent them home a few weeks ago along with your friend Herman Schlerling. Only you and your sister remain. He seemed not to press the issue of the statement, so I continued. What about my father? Can you tell me about him? Skakel glanced over with a somber look, stroked his chin with his fingers. I'm sorry to say, he is dead. Tears came to my eyes, and 1,000 memories flooded my mind. But I had to focus on the moment, so I allowed myself only one question. What happened to him? I don't know the details. Skakel turned to me to look at me. All I know is that he died not long after he was transferred here. He died in his cell? No, Skakel glanced down at the file. I think he died in the hospital. He paused for a moment to let me catch my breath, then leaned forward and said in a hushed but serious tone, As difficult as it may be to imagine, you have bigger problems than your father's death. He took the papers from the file. The police searched your house and found these documents. He laid them on the desk for me to see. This does not look good for you or your family, Skakel sighed. Suddenly my mind was no longer on Papa, but on the documents that lay before me. As I glanced at the pages, I saw a list of names and contact information, locations of drop sites, identity of safe houses. I knew immediately where they had come from. We devised our placement method in a way that limited the knowledge of where any one person was hiding to only the family with whom they hid and the last courier who accompanied them. In helping people to hide, we've been forced to, on occasion, to divide some families. Several of our couriers were concerned about how those people would find each other after the war ended, assuming it ended in an Allied victory. And they approached me about keeping the records so they could offer people a means of getting back together. I shared their concern, but warned against putting anything in writing for this very reason. Now confronted with the reality of what I'd contemplated then, fear rose inside me, and I thought of all the things that one could do with that information. A German soldier bent on rooting out every single Jew in the Netherlands could take those lists and find more than half the people we helped, plus the people who helped them. Then I remembered how Skakel had stood when I entered the room and how well our conversation had gone thus far. If they had wanted to use this list, they would not have left it in the file. And if they had already used it, they would not need my help now in disclosing what it meant. I studied the list a little longer, and a sense of calm returned. Words from Scripture came to me, and I repeated them in my mind. We have not been given a spirit of fear, but of power, love, and of self-control. There was nothing I could do or say that would make these documents go away, so once again I decided to take the conversation a different direction. You seem like a kind, considerate person. Are you a Christian? Skakel's forehead wrinkled in a frown. Miss Ten Boom, that is dangerous talk for the times in which we live. He sat up straight and began to shuffle his papers on his desk. I may be sympathetic to your situation, but I am still a magistrate and swore to uphold the law, even if I disagree with it. I smiled at him. It has always been dangerous to talk of obedience to God that transcends more compliance with the law. No one wants to hear the truth. I must remind you, it is now illegal to promote any form of religion, and I insist that you— I'm not really trying to promote religion, I said, interrupting him. But I am compelled to obey God first. You know I can't give them the statement you suggested, and I'm certainly not going to implicate my sister to save myself. Well, you needn't worry about my soul, Skakel picked up the papers he had showed me. The list the soldiers found at the house. Then he pushed back his chair and stood. I'm in good hands for eternity, he continued as he came around the ends of the desk. Even if I can't quite articulate it the way you would. But you should be careful about your own life. The Germans who came to your house want to kill you. Papers in hand, he moved past me to the fireplace, took a poker from the hook near the mantel, and stoked the fire until it burned brightly. Our friend Rolf told me about what you have been doing, with the flames leaping higher up the chimney. Skakel tossed the papers into the firebox and watched while they disappeared in the fire. Then he looked back at me with a smile and said, I will do as much for you as I can, but the final decision about your release is not mine to make. I am only a magistrate. I make recommendations, not decisions. Thank you, I said meekly. I wanted to hug his neck and kiss his cheek, but it didn't seem appropriate. I only wish I could do more, he said, as he returned to his seat at the desk. With the file still open on the desk, he flipped through several pages and then said, Tell me about your medical condition. I have pernicious anemia. Pernicious? Deadly. But you're alive. Yes, I nodded. It's treatable, but it requires daily doses of vitamins and liver extract. I assure you have not received any of these since you arrived here. From the way he asked the question, I was certain my condition had become obvious. Before I left for Amsterdam to see Dr. Trump, I had noticed dark circles beneath my eyes. Mama told me they were hereditary from her side of the family, but after I began taking the liver extract, the circles went away. I could have told Skakel all of that, but decided not to. And instead, when he assumed I had not had the treatment since coming there, I simply nodded and said, That is correct. I will see what I can do. He closed the file, checked his watch once more, then stood. Well, he sighed, I think it's about over. I rose from my chair and I said, You've done so much for me, I almost hate to ask, but do you think it would be possible for me to see my sister? I'll try to arrange something, but don't get your hopes up. I have little influence over how they treat prisoners here. The staff may be Dutch, but the Germans control everything. If I say too much, they will become suspicious of me, but I will see what I can do. He pressed a button attached to his phone, and in a moment the door opened. 2 guards appeared and gestured for me to come. I rose from my chair, glanced at Skakel's direction, and our eyes met, and I gave him a smile, as well as saying thank you once more, then followed the guards outside. On the way back to the cell, I wondered what it meant, a magistrate with compassion and apparent respect for the law. Tulips growing by his cottage, water with fresh bread and butter, and most of all, the documents he destroyed in the fire. God was at work in my life, and I was sure of that. The light had not gone out completely in the Netherlands, but where the future would take me, I had no idea. A few days later, after food call and a tray pickup, and for no obvious reason, the door to our cell opened. At first I thought nothing of it, and I didn't even look, expecting to hear it slam shut when the guard realized they had come to the wrong place. But when it didn't close immediately, I turned to look. As I did, my heart leaped against my chest as I saw Corrie walk by. She looked thinner, and from dark circles beneath her eyes, I was sure she was still sick as the day we arrived. But she was strong enough to move on her own, and from her gait, I knew they had not broken her spirit. Shekel was right. It hadn't been much. Only a few seconds passed as she walked by and disappeared from sight. But I had seen her, and I knew she was alive. As the guards pushed the door to our cell closed, I sank to the floor to give thanks. It is so good to get back with y'all and reading this book again. It's just, you got to remember this is a historical fiction, so this particular situation happened with Corey and not Betsy, so it just kind of changed around, and they can have that liberty in a historical fiction book. So, but it is a very good book, and I've really appreciated the writer. And again, I hope there's not any more interruptions, that we continue straight through to the end. Thank you for being patient with me, and thank you for your love, and I just want you to know that I love you, I'm praying for you, and bye-bye for now.